What was Fury hiding? Why was he gone for so long? And was Ross a Skrull the whole time? Salutations and fist bumps, folks. Welcome back to the grid, and this is the kind of time and carrying on that I've been looking for in the MCU for a bit. Secret Invasion Episode 1 was a landslide of... Wait, hold on. And there are so many things that point to or change things inside of the MCU, both past, present, and future. And of course, I spent hours inside of this episode going over each and every detail that you might have missed about Secret Invasion Episode 1. So put on your scroll detector glasses and let's get right into it. The opening Marvel title card does not use flashy swoop through the letters stuff that they usually do inside the Marvel movies and TV shows. Instead, it puts me in the feel of the old school Marvel title card, which we used to see back in the early 2000s. Man, I was looking forward to that. Cap, there's no time for that. We have places to be and people, or Skrulls, to see. This ain't about the Avengers and all their hang-ups. It's about the harsh reality of living in a world with no hero or government can be trusted. We open in Moscow, present day, which immediately put me in the mindset of a Cold War spy like James Bond or a Tom Clancy film. And we get a chance to see the same Muscalo font that we saw in Captain America Civil War and in Black Widow, which themselves are another set of MCU spy movies. So stylistically and tonally, it's evident that the producers are going for a more espionage, globetrotting, political drama feel. And by present day, it's confirmed that by Jonathan Schwartz, a Marvel executive, that the show takes place after She-Hulk. So in the MCU timeline, we're looking at around late 2025, early 2026. However, take that with a grain of salt because we all know how the MCU feels about keeping its chronological order intact in terms of dates and all that kind of stuff. We begin with Agent Everett Ross, or, spoiler alert, who we believe to be him, taking a call after being introduced as a CIA agent. We first met Ross in Captain America Civil War and then seeing him again in Black Panther, and he then reprised his role in Wakanda Forever. We then learned that his ex-wife is the CIA director, Valerie DeFontaine. Her name is just so much fun to say.
I just hear that name and I shut up. Mufasa. Ooh. Do it again.
And in that movie, he committed espionage for Wakanda, which Okoye then broke him out later. But, spoiler alert incoming, since this is a Skrull imposter of Ross, maybe the real Ross is currently hiding in Wakanda somewhere. Or he actually may have been taken and is currently in a Skrull fracking pod in a dark room somewhere. Like for real, this is a real big question. Was Ross a Skrull the whole time? I plan on doing a little bit more research on that topic in the coming days, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed so you don't miss that video. He then goes to meet Agent Prescott. He looks familiar. Haven't you watched a show from that guy before? Yes, you're right, Cap. That's Richard Dormer, who played Beric Dondarrion in Game of Thrones. See, I be watching. You do be watching. Fist bump, man. As we see Ross walking, we see him in a brick tunnel with a trench coat, which is a classic spy setup that was possibly inspired by spy films from the 1940s. Orson Welles' The Third Man, or Seton I. Miller's Ministry of Fear. Series director Ali Salim confirmed in an interview that movies or films like this were a part of his inspiration. Ross tosses his phone because he doesn't want to be tracked, and then pulls a weapon from his ankle, the smoking gun that would take poor old Prescott down. We then hear Prescott's voice for the first time.
Imagine a world where information can't be trusted. Not very hard.
And this hits hard for those living in the real world because this is part of the reason or the way that we live inside of our world today. No one trusts the news or anything that they read on the internet anymore, since spreading fake news is far too easy. And by the way, his voice is perfect for this type of setting because it gives you the who can you trust vibe from jump. A baritone true believer rant, which was the theme that Brian Michael Bendis' Marvel crossover event that ran roughly between 04 to 09 that this series is based on. Though to me it also has some familiar feelings of the newer version of Secret Invasion as well. But specifically here, Prescott is talking to who he believes is Ross, and how in recent events, or the way that Prescott tells it, recent events basically should tell Ross that he can't even trust his own ex-wife, Val, you know, the CIA director, which to me sounds like Prescott is hinting that Val could be a Skrull, especially because he has a solid suspicion that government officials have been infiltrated already. However, without realizing the guy that he's actually talking to is a Skrull. And while we're playing the game of Roll of Fortune, I do think that Val is a pretty good candidate to be a Skrull. Prescott then makes mention to the hazy distinction between real news and fake news, something that we saw explored in Spider-Man No Way Home with J. Jonah Jameson's Daily Bugle, which by the end was a Facebook Live streamed all over Times Square. As we see Ross walking up to the building, you can see the windows have now been blacked out with newspaper because Prescott doesn't want to be surveilled and to make more room for his conspiracy clause. Prescott's computer shows a UKN24 news website, which it's not very clear on whether this is a real news outlet inside the MCU or not, but it's painted as a BBC outlet of sorts. Or this could be news coming from the Kremlin, since of course this is Russia, and being a dictatorship doesn't necessarily allow residents to reach Western internet. So Prescott would then have to have his own proxy. We then see a classic Pepe Sylvia research wall. This, my friends, gives us a beautiful look at the board that Prescott has been touting this whole time. I need to break all this down. Let's ride. We see news clippings about Colombian ex-rebel politician who is surging with young voters. And the headline says that he's a nationalist, which should already tell us that something ain't right here. Because in Latin America, and in most places for that matter, young voters don't typically gravitate to far-right nationalists. On the contrary, in Latin America, left-wingers and socialites are usually more popular with younger voters. So this further tells us that both sides of the political ship are being steered by Skrull. And a nation of very discontented young rebels is exactly what Gravik is leading at this moment. And at the same time, this tells us that there are way more than just a handful of Skrulls on Earth than what we saw at the end of Captain Marvel. Prescott says,
Precisely what they want you to think. Argentina taxed Colombia. Colombia taxed the Philippines. A violent chain reaction consuming the globe. You realize that the entire world is at war?
Which is the entire plan of Rebel Skrulls in the first place. To undermine the world's government, weakening them to then replace the leaders with their own people. Which again is similar to what happened in the comics. In fact, let's pause for a second and talk about what happened inside of that crossover event. So, in the comics, all this starts with a death. Fast forward, the Illuminati were a group of heroes who tried to ward off threats before they actually happened, in retaliation to the Kree-Skrull war that then spilled over into Earth. The Illuminati then went to the Skrull home, blew some stuff up, to warn the Skrulls to leave Earth alone, but that had an opposite effect of what they were trying to do, and the Skrull Emperor swore vengeance on them. A few years later, Galactus ate the Skrull home, leaving them all homeless, similar to what happened in the MCU. So these homeless nomadic Skrulls started to spread a prophecy that their world would be lost, and then they would claim a blue world as their own, which many of them thought would be Earth. If you know anything about marketing, blue world is similar to blue ocean, which really just means new or untapped area. So they began a slow, years-long invasion of Earth, where they were replacing key leaders and superheroes. This particularly started in 2006 with Civil War, which divided the heroes and weakened them. Actually, that Civil War may have been started by Skrulls in the first place. There was Secret Invasion where people lost faith in governments, which is exactly what's happening in this story, after so many heroes turned out to be Skrulls. Rounding third and heading home, this was followed by Dark Reign, where the villains essentially took over Earth, something we might see in Captain America Brave New World, which I hate that new title, by the way. I wish they would have just kept it New World Order, but whatever. And in the Thunderbolt. So to push forward, in the comic event, several heroes were revealed to be Skrulls, and even Spider-Woman was revealed to be the Skrull Empress in disguise. This ended with Norman freaking Osborn finally being the one to pull the trigger and kill her. And of course, the government made him the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I do think that something like this could happen inside of the MCU, because Harrison Ford's Thunderbolt Ross has already been said to become president inside the MCU. And Ross is going to take a much steeper stance against superhumans. Then we see a redacted document beneath showing the same bearded man who appeared on the computer screen a few moments ago, followed by post-it notes reading Bogota terror connected to heist, who is the target? And besides that, to the left, Argentine group claims to be responsible. Prescott later explains that there were Argentinian terrorist groups that attacked Bogota, resulting in a political shift in that country, followed by an attack in the Philippines, and then a mass shooting in Munich. We also see on the board a mention of an explosion in London. Rather than individual groups, he says that they're all connected by one group of Skrulls seeking to destabilize political power. There's also headlines of an embassy attack, theft of confidential item, which from the sticky note, the heist might mean that the Skrulls are taking tissue and other materials to create super Skrulls, which in the comics are Skrulls that can mimic the powers and the personage of the enhanced individuals that they shapeshift into. And if you remember from the trailer, we saw a container with Cull Obsidian on the label, which could have been one of those stolen items. Prescott also has a Russian translation book sitting on a table showing that he followed the Skrull hunt city to city and had to keep up with the language as he went, which for me proves that he is not a Skrull, because if he had taken on the particular persona of a human, then he would have also taken on their mind. But then again, if he was a Skrull, he would only know in part because Skrulls take top level surface things in terms of memory usage. All of these events have happened since the blip, which makes perfect sense because the blip removed half of the people in the world. So missing people would be very easy to replace. And these replaced people are now Skrulls running rampant, sowing seeds of discord everywhere they go. And by the way that Prescott lays this out, it's possible that Skrulls have laid seeds of civil unrest even inside of Wakanda, in Wakanda Forever, where we learned that the US wants a regime change inside of Wakanda. We then hear Ross say,
"The atmosphere has been tense."
Well, yeah, it should be for you, buddy, because you're an imposter who had to adapt to a different atmosphere. You ain't slick.
Shouldn't even be here. Be gone. Wanna be gone.
Then hear this exchange between Ross and Prescott.
Say, the only Skrull contact has been through Nick Fury. That means there are allies.
Then where is Fury?
He's on Saber.
Yeah, Saber is the floating space station that we saw in the Marvels trailer. And it might be the same space station that Fury was on in the post-credit scene of Far From Home. And by the way, Saber is based on Peak in the comic and is the headquarters of SWORD in the MCU, which if you don't know is basically the people that police everything that happens inside of outer space. They've actually been seen inside of WandaVision under the leadership of Taylor Haywood, and at that point they were focused on terrestrial anomalies like Vision. Also remember, Monica Rambeau was called up to Saber by a Skrull working with Fury. But if you're gaining some insight so far and your fandom knowledge is expanding just a little bit, go ahead and fist bump that like button for me. Appreciate it. And in the midst of this conversation, Prescott calls BS and tackles Ross, then regains access to his firearm and... which is the first of many deaths inside of this episode by a Skrull. Ross then calls for an extract by Maria. Ross is tailed through this blue lit rave area, which put me in the mindset of... And right after that, we get a really cool action sequence that leads to a stair scene. And I want you to notice how they go up 4 flights of stairs and we can see them, but the other 3 are not seen, which then further caught my attention as I watched this a little bit slower because of the EM on the building. Now, this could be just a random Moscow building. However, it could also be a nod or a slight nod to the fact that the characters are only visible for a moment and then hidden from view, which is similar to an electromagnetic field, which comes through even more once they reach the rooftop, because on an electromagnetic field, purple is a part of the non-visible area, which according to this graph also includes gamma rays. You know what I'm talking about. And when those purple tones mix with the green backlit sky, it gives off a green and purple color palette, which we then see in the main title. Also note, green is the color of the Skrull's skin, and purple is what their bruises and blood Ross show up. Then attempts a pretty lengthy jump and misses. And at that time, we learned that the pursuer of Ross was actually Talos, as Ross bleeds out on the street and dies. And remember, the last time that we saw Talos, him and his wife were impersonating or standing in for Fury and Maria inside of Far From Home, which is classic because that movie, as well as this show, deals with villains using misinformation as a weapon. Then cut to the opening credit scene, which reveals a green world, which to me, this could be the Skrull planet Skrullo, as a settled image of a planet that explodes and looks like a volcano, followed by the doomed planet as spaceships flee from the bottom right hand corner. Then a single figure standing under a spaceship, which to me feels like a play on the "we are not alone in this universe" thing, but also reminded me about Peter Quill when he was taken by the Ravagers Avengers in 1988. The next image depicts Fury as both himself and a Skrull, teasing that Fury himself could be a Skrull or at one point is impersonated by a Skrull. Further artwork for the sequence shows people shapeshifting as they're walking, which reminded me of the Animals, because in a similar nature, they were able to do the exact same thing. I want to draw your attention to the White House for just a second. Notice as the green cloud pulls over it, the White House stays white. It doesn't change to the color green as all of the other landmarks inside of this sequence have, which could possibly mean that the president isn't a Skrull. But as we talked about earlier, we know that the current president is not going to make it into Captain America Brave New World. Then cut from the opening credit sequence to the first scene with a very clever lighting and camera trick, which makes Fury look like an alien stepping out of a ship, which Fury, not as young as he used to be, limps as he gets used to the gravity back on Earth. Fury is now also wearing a knit cap and coat, which are pretty much the same clothes that Skrull Ross wears as well. But what's most important here is what Fury is not wearing, his eye patch. And in an interview done with Vanity Fair, Samuel L. Jackson said that the patch was a part of Strong Fury. This Fury is different. Now his new look is a part of the frailty or the vulnerability that he exposes. Talos makes mention of the plant that he's been tending to.
Is that from home?
Santa Milica. That's a SCRULL sky plant.
Now the word Santo is Spanish for the word saint, holy, or sacred, and Milka is a Hindu name meaning desiring union or wishes unity. So when you put them together, you get sacred unity, which is what Talos and Soren were looking for in terms of the relationship between humans and Skrull. Talos also mentions that Carol Danvers disappeared, and we've seen her in the Marvels trailer lately, as well as at the end credit of Ms. Marvel, which implies that she's been around fighting galactic battles, but somehow forgot about her promise to the Skrull. We then learned that Talos was kicked off the Skrull Council, and Gravik now leads it and is stationed inside of Russia using abandoned nuclear plants, which many are off the book. We learned that Skrulls can withstand radiation because they shapeshift at a molecular level, as told per Captain Marvel, which would allow their cells to resist neutrons firing through them. We then learned that Skrulls are using an American from an AAR group, Americans Against Russia, to detonate a bomb with materials taken from the Kazakhstan raid to start a war between Russia and the United States. A plot that can also be seen in the Tom Clancy's spy thriller, The Sum of All Fear. Fury then passes a couple kissing, and the woman looks up at him suspiciously, but reveal later that the people that he saw on this walk were all Gravik. We then see a little girl playing with a very colorful ball, which for me reminded me of Schindler's List, similar to the little girl wearing red inside of that movie, saying that something is not directly right for this particular situation. Fury is then kidnapped by Goon, from Sonya Falsworth specifically, who is played by Olivia Colman. As this scene transitions, we hear clocks in the background from Fury's perspective.
This is so exciting. Let's see, large black man, Moscow. Well, it could either be Nick Fury or the ghost of Paul Robeson
underneath a hood, because again, he was taken by Goon, which he then asks about in terms of the clock, as he cleverly places a device on the left eye of the owl that Sonya has inside of her office. He then asks her, as she takes the hood off, she jokes about seeing the ghost of Paul Robeson. Referring to the actor and singer best known for his rendition of Old Man River in Showboat. And since Robeson was politically active, embraced socialism, and he visited Moscow frequently, he's not just talking about a random black man showing up in Moscow. When Fury asks about the clock fetish, she then tells him,
It was an old English spy master that started the tradition. A clock goes up when your time in the circus is done.
And this is fitting because John Lee Carey nicknamed MI6 the circus because the headquarters were located at Cambridge. So basically the spy master would put up a clock every time either someone retired or was KIA, killed in action. Fury then makes himself comfortable by putting on jazz after taking the drink from Sonya, and the song playing in the background here is Equinox by John Coltrane. Thematically, that's a very interesting choice of song because an equinox is a planetary event that only happens twice a year for the longest and shortest days of the year. So like Skrulls and humanity, it shows how Earth has two sides. Also notice how all the clock faces are now pointing to different times, meaning that you can't even trust the clock in this room or anything else in this series for that matter. Fury then asks about Kazakhstan, and Sonya's response feels like a lie because she says she doesn't know, but by her facial expression and body language, yeah, she lied. To which Fury calls her out on that lie. She then name checks Thanos. Fury then makes the point that he's been dealing with Skrulls for over some 30 years, but in my opinion, that should mean that you should know the difference between a Skrull and a human, right? Sonya then makes mention that the pre-blip Fury would have seen her goons coming miles away, and I would actually agree with her on that. He says that he did this all on purpose just to get to her, then offering to have her goons take him back to his safe house, to which Fury responds with one of my favorite lines of this episode.
If your memory jogs about that Kazakhstan thing, call him brother.
Classic Sam Jackson. We then cut to the gate of New Skrullos. New Skrullos is the name of the homeworld of the Skrulls in the comic. A young guy can be seen walking up to the gate and guards greet him with guns. He then gives the code word,
home in my own skin.
As we see a grown-up Gaia driving up to the gate to meet him. My question is, how did she know that he was coming in the first place? But we met Gaia back in Captain Marvel as a child, and now we're seeing her all grown up and being played by Emilia Clarke, who is most famous for her role as Daenerys Targaryen on Game of Thrones, making her one of the few actors or actresses to play a character in Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and now the MCU. But she was not the first to do this. Let me know down in the comments who you think the first actor actually was. On the way to the compound, Gaia gives Beto, the name of the guy, produce that would only be found on their planet, saying that inside the compound only grow Skrull produce. Gaia then takes Beto to the main entrance of the compound where Skrull warriors are actually taking human form. And in the background, we can actually see Paprika. And this is where Skrull warriors take on their different identities. This woman is playing a Skrull by the name of Kriga. And in the comic, Kriga is a super Skrull who is one of the few Skrulls with superpowers who can replicate the abilities of the Fantastic Four. We then head back to the safe house with Fury and team, and they are now listening to a meeting that was supposed to be private between Sonya and again, that device is placed on the owl's left, just like Fury. And as this exchange is going on, we hear popcorn popping
You got that right.
in the background with Fury actually at the microwave getting it out. And my question here is this his favorite snack, or is this a heavy spoilers reference? Fast forward to get our first look at Gravik in the series inside of the cafeteria, where apparently everyone eats with a fully automatic weapon. And Gravik is either drinking tea or coffee here, but I'm not really sure exactly which one, but I believe it's tea based on the amount of sugar that he puts in it because it's a lot. Pagon then tells Gravik that Fury is in Moscow. That name, Pagon, in the comics, actually given to a Skrull who assumed the power of Elektra. Pagon then calls for Gaia, giving her cash and an address. Talos opens the chain gate with his bare hand, to which Fury says,
Not bad for a 136-year-old.
Well, you know, not even 40 in human years. Haven't even gone on my midlife crisis shopping spree yet.
and on that thought, Talos then asks Fury what he got for his, and he said,
The Avengers.
They meet with Paprika, and he believes that they are there to buy paintings, to which he speaks in Russian saying, and Talos responds, nah, we're not really here to buy paintings from you, fam. Paprika then asks, and in classic Sam Jackson style, Fury says,
Some damn good answers.
Paprika says that he's late for an appointment with his wife, to which they call his bluff and say,
Anything in our file about this one having a wife?
Yeah, has an ex-wife. Lives in Miami with a soccer player.
Oh, so we're gonna go ahead and call that a lie.
So, because we've seen him earlier in the episode, we know that this version is a Skrull, meaning that this is yet another nod to the fact that Skrulls don't get all of the idiosyncrasies and intricate details of human life. And this entire sequence is classic Sam Jackson style in terms of the way that Fury talks and responds to every question and comment that comes his way. When he sits in the chair, he says,
Oh, damn, this is nice.
to which Paprika says that the chair belonged to King Louis XV. They further proceed to unravel the lie, and then again, like I mentioned before in Sam Jackson style, Fury says,
Everybody gets one. Nobody gets two. So,
which then also makes me wonder what Fury's one lie actually happens to be. Because why would he tolerate one lie from others? He did the same thing with Sonya earlier. I personally believe for a long time that Fury had a boo somewhere, because when he was dusted, the way that he said,
oh no.
mother.
It was just way too sentimental for me, and he was thinking about somebody on the way out. Fury then asks Paprishkin about the dirty bomb, and he lies to him again, to which Fury responds and says,
Dirty bomb. Boom goes the dynamite. Lie number 2. I just told you, everybody gets 1. Nobody gets 2.
Paprishkin then asks if Fury is going to shoot him, and this was one of the best lines of this scene specifically.
Maybe. Well, probably. But not right now.
And from there, Talos bashes his head in. Talos then asks him where the bombs are again, and when Paprishkin says,
Prey on people.
Fury knows that there is no coming back from this and fires at Paprishkin. Fury then meets Maria for a game of chess. In the conversation with Maria, Fury is asked if he's making friends with the locals, to which he says,
Oh, do you think we kept the Cold War from going hot? Spooks like me, bad shots.
You can't say that.
You can't say that.
Spook was a derogatory name once used for black people and an old school name for a spy. Then cut to the climax, and this gets really tense really fast. Fury, Maria, and Talos are waiting for the bags to arrive after Talos has met with Gaia and understands that each of those bags are going to be tagged with an infrared X. But once they encounter the bags, a handoff happens and then chaos ensues. We follow as close as we can each bag in each or different vantage points, and as I was watching this, it actually reminded me of that movie. And as we cycle through these vantage points, we end on Fury's, which is looking into a crowd via infrared glasses. He is then met with a girl with a similar colorful ball from earlier. And as this sequence plays out, we find out that this is actually Gravik shapeshifting in plain sight, because he doesn't really care about anybody seeing him do this, because he knows what's about to happen in just a few moments. He then triggers the first bomb and Fury hesitates to shoot. And because of his hesitation to take the shot, Maria ends up dying, because Gravik, now having the ability to take the shape of Fury in this particular form that he just saw, he is now able to impersonate him and lure poor Maria over when she's helping someone up that has fallen from this attack, calling her over and then promptly shooting her as soon as she gets point blank. Maria's final words, to which Fury actually responds in a crying voice, "Not me." But while it wasn't Fury directly pulling the trigger, the blood still does remain on his hands because of his lack of movement before or hesitation during the actual event. And this episode ends with a heart-wrenching shot of one of the OGs of the MCU now gone. Man, RIP Maria Hill. Thank you, Kobe Smulders, for everything that you did over the past 11 years inside the MCU. We will miss you tremendously. And I also believe that part of the reason why Soren is established in this episode as being gone is because we now have no real way to bring Maria back, because we know that she is completely human because she doesn't shapeshift at the end when she died, which this leaves no doubt that that is actually Maria. Man, what a ride. Take a breath if you need to. And please, if you enjoyed this breakdown, fist bump that like button for me, because that will let me know that I should do more of these. And if you really like the breakdown, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any more explanations of fandom we all love. Drop what I may have missed down in the comment. And until next time, y'all be smooth. Blood out.